Vanished, mysteries that defy explanation. Welcome to True Crime and Mysteries. Uncover the secrets.
Welcome to our deep dive. We're going to be looking into one of Hollywood's most infamous unsolved mysteries, the Black Dahlia murder.
Yeah.
You've given us some really fascinating material on this, so we're going to unpack the story of Elizabeth Short, the investigation, and of course some of the most compelling theories.
Right.
We're talking 1947 in Los Angeles.
Wow.
A place where dreams and darkness kind of collide. Let's dive in.
It's a case that even after all these years, I think continues to fascinate and horrify. The brutality of the crime and the mystery surrounding the killer's identity, I think that's what has kept people captivated for so many decades.
Yeah, for our listener, let's kind of set the stage. It's post-World War II, Hollywood is booming, and there's this, palpable feeling of optimism,
right?
But I think also mixed with this underlying unease. This is where Elizabeth Short, a young woman with Hollywood aspirations, sort of enters the picture. She becomes known as the Black Dahlia.
The Black Dahlia.
And that's a nickname we'll unpack a little bit later. But first, let's talk about the chilling discovery that really shocked Los Angeles.
Yeah, January 15th, 1947. Elizabeth Short's body was found in a vacant lot in Limerick Park. And what struck investigators, and I think continues to intrigue us today, is the sheer brutality and the very calculated nature of the crime.
Right.
She was bisected, completely drained of blood, and had a Glasgow smile carved into her face.
Oh my gosh, it sounds almost ritualistic.
It does.
The level of staging, the posing of her body, the intestines tucked neatly beneath her. I mean, what do you make of this calculated display? Was it simply about, inflicting pain, or was there a deeper, perhaps symbolic motivation behind it?
That's a great question, and it's a question that's haunted investigators for years and, of course, fueled countless theories. I think the fact that the killer deliberately posed her body, went to great lengths to drain her of blood before moving her to that vacant lot points to a level of premeditation. That goes, I think, beyond a simple crime of passion. It suggests really a desire to shock, to horrify, perhaps even to communicate something very specific.
And then, of course, you have the taunting letters sent to the police and the press.
Right.
Cut out letters from newspapers. Almost like a ransom note, but far more sinister.
Yes.
What can we glean from those letters? Were they just a way to mislead investigators, or do they offer a glimpse into the killer's psyche?
Those letters are so crucial, I think, to understanding the psychological dimension of this case. The content was often mocking and derisive, filled with bizarre clues and false leads. It was as if the killer reveled in the attention and wanted to prolong the investigation, turning it into this macabre game. And the very act of sending those letters, created from those cut-out newspaper clippings, I think speaks to that desire to manipulate and control. This wasn't just about taking a life, but manipulating the narrative, asserting dominance over the authorities, even the public.
It certainly adds a very chilling psychological layer to the case. But amidst all of this, it's crucial to remember that Elizabeth Short, the woman behind the sensationalized headline, was a real person with her own story.
Absolutely.
So what can you tell us about her life before it was tragically cut short?
Well, Elizabeth Short was a young woman trying to navigate the complexities of life in post-war Los Angeles. She had dreams of stardom, moved frequently, worked various jobs, and, was known to socialize with people from all walks of life, including those in Hollywood's elite. This makes understanding her social network all the more crucial, I think, to unraveling the mystery of her death.
Right.
Yeah.
Her social connections, her movements, it becomes a focal point in the investigation. We'll dive into some of the key suspects a little bit later, but first, I think it's important to understand that Elizabeth Short was more than just a victim.
Yeah.
She was a young woman trying to find her place in a city known for its promise, but also its peril.
Absolutely. It's far too easy to reduce her to just that sensationalized headline.
Right.
I think it's crucial to acknowledge the human being behind the tragedy. Right. The individual whose life was tragically cut short.
Speaking of individuals, let's delve into one of the most intriguing figures in this case.
Okay.
Dr. George Hodel. Now, his own son, Steve Hodel, a former LAPD detective, builds a really compelling, albeit controversial, case against his father.
I think what makes the Dr. George Hodel theory so compelling yet unsettling is the source of the information. It's his own son.
Right.
Steve Hodel dedicated years to investigating his father, and the evidence he unearthed is both intriguing and disturbing. He points to his father's medical knowledge, which aligns with the precision of the cuts on Elizabeth Short's body.
And then there are those chilling wiretap recordings of Dr. Hodel from the 1950s, where he's heard saying, "Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia, they can't prove it now." I mean, it just sends chills down your spine.
It does. Those recordings, coupled with photographs resembling Elizabeth Short that were found amongst Dr. Hodel's belongings, paint a very disturbing picture.
But it's important to note these are just pieces of a very complex puzzle.
Right.
We need to consider the reliability of these sources, explore whether there are alternative interpretations.
Absolutely. While the evidence presented by Steve Hodel is undeniably compelling, I think it's crucial to approach it with a critical eye. There are questions about the authenticity of some of the evidence, and of course the potential for bias considering the source.
It's a reminder that, we need to weigh the evidence carefully and consider all possible angles.
Right.
Dr. Hodel might be a central figure in this story, but he's not the only one.
Right.
Remember, this is Hollywood in the 1940s, a city with a dark underbelly and a history of secrets.
That's true.
And that leads us to another intriguing aspect of this case.
Okay.
Was Elizabeth Short entangled in something she shouldn't have been? Did she stumble upon information or become involved with individuals who had a vested interest in silencing her?
It's certainly a possibility, especially when you consider the rumors of corruption and cover-ups that plagued the LAPD at the time. The LAPD in the 1940s was notorious for its corruption, with ties to organized crime. It's not a stretch to imagine that certain individuals, perhaps with connections to power or influence, might have been shielded from scrutiny.
So we have a brutal crime, a taunting killer, a long list of suspects with intriguing connections to Elizabeth Short, and a police force potentially grappling with internal conflicts and corruption. I mean, it's a recipe for a mystery that could endure for decades.
It did. But before we delve into the reasons why this case remains unsolved, I think there's one more fascinating avenue we need to explore.
Okay.
And it leads us outside the confines of Hollywood.
Okay.
And into the realm of a potential serial killer.
Oh, you're talking about the Cleveland Torso murders?
I am.
Now things are getting really interesting.
Yeah. The Cleveland Torso murders, which terrorized Cleveland, Ohio in the 1930s, bear a striking resemblance to the Black Dahlia case, particularly in the method of dismemberment.
So is it possible we're dealing with a serial killer operating across state lines? Could the same individual be responsible for these gruesome crimes?
It's a chilling thought to consider.
Yeah, it is a chilling thought, the idea of a killer just moving from city to city, leaving a trail of victims in their wake. What are the key similarities between the Black Dahlia case and the Cleveland Torso murders that make investigators even consider this as a possibility?
Well, both cases involve victims who were dismembered with a level of precision that suggests some anatomical knowledge. The bodies were often drained of blood, posed in ways that seemed deliberately macabre, almost theatrical.
Yeah.
It really suggests a pattern of behavior, a signature that could point to a single perpetrator.
Right, almost like the killer's trying to create a gruesome spectacle.
Yeah.
To send a message through the brutality and staging. Do we know anything about the victims in the Cleveland Torso murders that might connect them to Elizabeth Short, or is the connection purely in the methodology?
Well, while there are clear similarities in the way the victims were treated, there are some key differences too.
Okay.
The victims in Cleveland were primarily from the city's lower socioeconomic strata, and many remained unidentified. Elizabeth Short, on the other hand, was connected to those Hollywood social circles, even if she wasn't a starlet herself. This difference raises questions about whether the same killer would target such distinct victim profiles.
It's a puzzle trying to fit these pieces together, but the possibility of a serial killer operating across state lines during that era, leaving a trail of unsolved murders, it's a terrifying thought. Makes you wonder, were there other cases that might fit this pattern? Other victims who never received justice?
It's certainly possible. In those days, communication and information sharing between law enforcement agencies across state lines wasn't nearly as sophisticated as it is today. It's very conceivable that a killer could have exploited those limitations, moving from city to city, leaving a trail of unsolved murders in their wake.
And speaking of limitations, let's kind of shift gears a little bit and talk about the investigation itself. Why do you think, despite all the media attention, the numerous suspects, the efforts of law enforcement, why does the Black Dahlia murder remain unsolved?
Well, there were several factors that contributed to the Black Dahlia case going cold. I think one of the biggest challenges was the overwhelming number of false confessions.
Oh, wow.
Think about it. Over 500 people claimed responsibility.
Wow.
Some seeking notoriety, others perhaps delusional,
Right.
and some possibly trying to protect the real killer.
Wow, that's an incredible number. It must have been a nightmare for investigators trying to sift through all those claims and determine which, if any, held any truth.
It created chaos and confusion, diverting resources and precious time away from pursuing genuine leads.
Right.
Imagine trying to track down and verify the claims of hundreds of individuals, many with questionable motives.
Yeah.
It was a logistical nightmare that hampered the investigation from the start.
And then, of course, there's the elephant in the room, the issue of police corruption.
Oh, yeah.
Something we've touched upon already. To what extent do you think that corruption within the LAPD played a role in hindering the investigation? Could powerful individuals have been involved, or were leads intentionally buried to protect certain figures?
Well, the LAPD in the 1940s was undeniably riddled with corruption,
Right.
with ties to organized crime and a culture of protecting its own. It's certainly plausible that individuals with connections to power might have been shielded from scrutiny and that evidence could have been tampered with or suppressed.
It makes you wonder if the investigation had been conducted with more integrity and transparency. If those in power had been held accountable, could Elizabeth Short's murder have been solved?
It's impossible to say for sure, but the potential for corruption within the LAPD casts a very long shadow over this case. It creates this sense of doubt, a lingering question of whether justice was truly pursued or if certain individuals were protected, allowing the real killer to escape accountability.
We also have to consider the limitations of forensic science at the time.
Oh, absolutely.
In the 1940s, DNA testing was non-existent, and many of the sophisticated crime scene analysis techniques we rely on today were still in their infancy. How do you think the lack of these tools impacted the investigation?
Oh, the absence of modern forensic tools undoubtedly hampered the investigation. Fingerprinting was still a relatively new technique, and blood analysis was far less sophisticated than it is today. Without the ability to analyze DNA, investigators relied heavily on witness testimony, physical evidence found at the crime scene, and the suspect's own admissions. This made it much more difficult to definitively link suspects to the crime and left more room for speculation and uncertainty.
It's like trying to solve this huge complex puzzle with so many missing pieces. Without the benefit of modern forensic science, investigators were essentially working in the dark, relying on methods that, while groundbreaking for their time, pale in comparison to the tools available today.
Precisely. Imagine trying to analyze bloodstains without DNA profiling, or attempting to identify a suspect based solely on eyewitness accounts, which are notoriously unreliable. It underscores how far forensic science has come, and makes you wonder how differently this case might have unfolded with the technology available today.
It's such a stark contrast to the world we live in now, where, every digital footprint, every text message, every online interaction can become a piece of evidence. It makes you think, if Elizabeth Short were alive today, would the outcome of her case be different?
It's an interesting thought experiment, isn't it? On one hand, we have surveillance cameras everywhere, digital records of our movements, and the ability to track communication with a level of precision that was unimaginable in the 1940s. But on the other hand, criminals have also adapted.
Of course.
Becoming more tech-savvy, utilizing encryption, finding ways to exploit the same technology that law enforcement relies on.
Right, it's this constant game of cat and mouse, isn't it? Technology evolves, investigative techniques advance, but so do the methods of those who seek to evade justice.
The digital age presents both opportunities and challenges for criminal investigations. It's a double-edged sword.
Despite the lack of a resolution, the Black Dahlia case continues to captivate our collective imagination. It's inspired countless books, movies, and TV shows.
It's true.
Becoming almost a part of American folklore. What do you think fuels this enduring fascination?
Well, I think the Black Dahlia case touches on so many universal themes. The allure and danger of Hollywood, the fragility of life, the pursuit of justice, and of course that enduring power of mystery.
Right.
It's a story that, even without a definitive ending, continues to ask those very profound questions about who we are and the darkness that can reside within us.
It's almost like the case itself becomes this cautionary tale, a reminder of the darkness that can exist beneath the surface, even in a place as glamorous and aspirational as Hollywood.
Yes, and it also raises questions about how we perceive and remember victims of crime.
Right.
Elizabeth Short, in many ways, has become an icon, a symbol, but I think it's crucial to remember the human being behind the legend.
It's so easy for the individual to get lost in the mythology of a case like this, but she was a daughter, a friend, someone with hopes and dreams that were tragically cut short.
And that's why I think the Black Dahlia case continues to haunt us. It's a stark reminder of the fragility of life, especially for young women trying to make their dreams come true in a city known for both its promise and its peril.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, if Elizabeth Short were alive today in the age of social media and digital footprints, would her case have been solved? Or would the killer still be kind of shrouded in shadow?
That is a fascinating question. On the one hand, we have so much more technology now,
Right.
so many tools at our disposal to investigate crimes. But on the other hand, the digital world can also create these new layers of anonymity and obfuscation.
It's a double-edged sword, isn't it? More information, but also more ways to hide. It makes you wonder if some mysteries are simply meant to endure.
Right.
To challenge us, to remind us that we don't always get the answers we seek.
Perhaps that's part of what makes the Black Dahlia case so compelling. It's a puzzle that may never be fully solved. But the search for the truth, the pursuit of justice, is, I think, what keeps us captivated.
As we wrap up our deep dive into this really haunting case, what would you say is the most enduring element of the Black Dahlia story? What's the one thing you hope our listener takes away from this exploration?
I think what continues to fascinate people, even after all these years, is the sheer mystery of it all. Despite countless theories, suspects, investigations, we're still left with that same fundamental question. Who killed Elizabeth Short?
Right.
And it's a question that may never have a definitive answer. And that's what makes this case so captivating. It forces us to grapple with the unknown, to confront the possibility that some secrets may remain buried forever.
It's a reminder that even in an age of technological advancements and forensic breakthroughs, there are still mysteries that elude us, stories that remain unfinished, and questions that just linger in the shadows.
And perhaps that's okay. Maybe it's the very act of questioning, of searching, of refusing to let go of the mystery. That keeps the story alive and ensures that Elizabeth Short is remembered not just as a victim, but as a young woman whose life was tragically cut short. A life that continues to spark intrigue and fuel our collective fascination with the unknown.
Well said. It's a case that stays with you, makes you think, and reminds us of the complexities of the human experience and the enduring power of mystery. Thank you for guiding us through this deep dive.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.